I really love the Patrick, you don't look like you're in Taiwan. I thought you were in Taiwan for some reason.
I leave tomorrow morning. Yep.
We're,
I will be in Taiwan. I just bring my office with me around the world.
I was looking to see if it was a virtual background, that you could have been faking me out. You could have been on a plane somewhere and they made it look that way, but no, that's great.
He has a TARDIS that's bigger on the inside.
That's right. So good. Yeah. So Patrick, I was mentioning that we are 6 months into Chiron. We're halfway through our program, and today we really wanted to continue our conversation on governance. And so I'm really wanting to get everyone's input today as we have a discussion of we're going to try to do some self-assessment. I really loved Aidan Culhane's discussion 2 weeks ago on Bioconductor. We're going to bring in other open source communities because it's such a fascinating conversation. But today is really special because we have a special guest. We have Laurier Arp from Lyrasis. And one of the things that Laurie is going to be talking about, and then we're going to go through an exercise together, is that she was part of a team that put together a evaluation of how to build and how to do a self-assessment of an open source community. How do we assess where we are? And we get to choose because every open source community is differently, but I think it helps for having a conversation of things that we might want to be doing. And so Laurie's been involved with several open source communities. And Laurie, do you want to give a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm Laurier Arp. I'm the director of DuraSpace Community Supported Programs at Lyrasis. So we're the organizational home for a bunch of different programs, including Archive Space, Collection Space, DSpace, Vivo, and Fedora, which are all kind of in the cultural heritage areas.
Now, I'm not familiar. So Vivo, was that the one that was with using RDF for doing CV and bibliographic querying?
So it's really a visual way of representing scholarship.
Yes. I know Vivo. That's the one I'm the most familiar with. Yeah, that's really fun. It came out of Cornell, I think.
Yes.
And that was super fun where it actually kind of is like a predecessor to Google Scholar and ResearchGate. And it was cooler because it enabled live querying of CVs and publications across different systems. That was a really fun knowledge network. So I actually really was a big fan of Vivo. But yeah, that's great. And do you want to? So what we're going to have is Laurie's going to give an opening presentation about this guideline. We're going to put the guideline link into the chat. We're going to try to use it. Adam and I are going to lead you through some discussions, and we're going to just try to get some feedback of where do we think we are in our journey and what sort of opportunities does that present us as we want to look forward. Laurie, well, take it away.
Sure. So let me just share my screen here. Can you see that okay?
Yep, I see him.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm used to Zoom, so everything is just a slight bit different. So Paul asked me to talk about some work we've done in terms of open source sustainability. So a little bit of background. I work at Lyrasis. We're a membership organization. We're all about helping our members and trying to think ahead and how to provide what they need. And one of the things we had heard a lot from our members was they were very committed to open source. They were dedicated to it, but concerns about how these programs sustain themselves. So we were very pleased that IMLS, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, has funded several phases of work really about bringing together different programs that serve cultural heritage and scientific communities to develop shared sustainability strategies. So in 2017 to 19, we did a survey, forum, and guidebook, and then they funded a second phase to do a practical toolkit, and that's the work we're in the midst of now. I always like to give a shout out to all the folks that are involved. Co-directors are me and my colleague, Megan Forbes, but we've really benefited from some amazing advisory group members. Rob at Columbia, Tom at Stanford, Michelle, who used to be with DPLA, Catherine Skinner used to be with Educopia, and Ann Baird Whiteside at Harvard. And then on the right and bottom are all the programs that participated in the first phase. So in the first phase, we got, I think, about 30 different programs, representatives from the 30 different programs to first do a survey and then do an event with us, a 2-day event in Baltimore, where we really dug into what made their program sustainable and how they thought about them. And so the short version, we kind of, when we did the survey and the event in Baltimore, we really thought that we would find certain key indicators of sustainability, that we would find that the ones that were sustainable were, had X amount of money or had been around so long or had so many contributors. And we did not find that. There was no Venn diagram where they all overlapped at some place. The sustainable programs really were ones that came from identified and clear community needs. There was a community, they had needs, the software and the community grew around it, versus somebody, falling in love with a piece of technology and hoping others love it too. The other thing that came out of that event was really that we were really hoping we could say, if you do X, Y, Z, you'll just get to Xanadu. You will be in sustainability, but it's not really one thing depending on that community, and it's not really a straight line. That sustainability has facets and phases that move together and separately. And on the right-hand side, you'll see one of the white pages that came out of the event in Baltimore. So I'll go over the phases and facets briefly. The phases, there are 3. Phase 1 is getting started. This is the early stages of planning, design, and development. This might be early grant funding or where you're still making the software itself. Phase 2 is a much longer, typically, phase. It's the broadest. It's where it's really critical to connect with those stakeholders and really invest them in the program. And phase 3 is kind of when you're feeling good about it. You're not thinking every day, how are we going to get to the next step? You're thinking, this is working. This is good. But that's where you want to be careful, because you don't want to stagnate in that position. You want to think about those same community goals and needs that you had at the beginning. Are they the same? Have they evolved? Are there new competitors? Are there new people in the hemisphere that are involved? Do you really need to continue? And so you may, in fact, need to go through phase 1 again. The other thing that when people talk about program sustainability, they tend to be thinking about funding. And funding's important, no doubt, but it's not the only thing. So we've broken it into 4 facets, and we've broken them here with like bright lines, but they're not absolute separate. They overlap in lots of ways, but for the purposes of making a framework, they're 4. One is governance. It's really establishing the roles and processes. It's deciding how decisions get made, who decides when new code comes in, or if we're going to seek a grant, or how people can play with different elements. Technology is really about the software development and the challenges that impact the development process. Technology is core in a lot of proprietary systems as well, but open source comes with its own set of circumstances. Resources is the third facet. We tend to think of financial contributions, and those are great, but financial contributions leads to staffing, or there could also be lots of contributions in terms of code or workshops or documentation. And the fourth, and what I tend to call the secret sauce, is really the community engagement. This is the efforts to foster involvement within a community. It's the taking people that use the software and making them people that care about the software and the community and sustaining it. So if you then put all the phases and facets together, you get our sustainability wheel. The whole idea is you don't necessarily have a program that's in one place overall. You might, in fact, have governance that's in phase 1 and technology that's in phase 2 and resources that's in phase 3, although that would be a particularly weird combination of phases and facets, but you know what I mean. You could be in different places and that's okay. The other thing I like to point out is the community really is the heart of it. If there's one secret or element to really think about, it's always keeping in mind that community, and it is the reason all these things work. This might be familiar to folks who, if you've looked at the guidebook, this is just a way of documenting kind of for phases and facets what the characteristics of each are. So for example, for governance, if you're in phase 1, really in establishing, you might be working with the original staff or organization. So the results of that first grant was a guidebook, and the guidebook is really intended to serve as a practical reference source to help programs serving cultural and scientific heritage plan for long-term sustainability and ensuring that resources and commitment will be available as long as the community needs it to be. And that's free to download. Anybody's able to download it and print it. The thing we found when we put it out, people were very excited and gave us lots of great feedback. But one of the things they said is, how do I use the guidebook? Like, we intended for it to be pretty self-service, but people said, these are great suggestions, but how do I take it to the next step? So IMLS kindly funded us creating a toolkit that's really intended for programs like yours and others to be able to strengthen their abilities to sustain their community-supported software. And so the whole idea is, if you've read the guidebook, for each phase and facet, there are moving forward objectives. So if you decide, for example, that your governance is in phase 1 and you want to get to phase 2, we recommend that there are certain moving forward objectives. So one would be defining a need for governance. What are the gaps in your current governance? All decisions might be made perfectly, or there might be some gaps. Another objective is to review existing governance models. You might want to know what other people are doing. 3 is selecting the governance model that works best for you now, not for perpetuity, for now. It's always something you can change. You're not locked in for life. And then 4th, communicating those changes to stakeholders. So on the website, which I'll point to in a moment, the toolkit has all these. So for example, if you decided you're in phase 1 of governance, you know that you really are interested in one of the objectives, such as defining a need for governance. We outline particular activities that can help you progress with that. So if you were in the reviewing existing governance models, there's some activities for that. If you're ready to select a governance model, there's an activity for that. And for example, if you chose catastrophizing, you could go in, download the PDF or a Word document if you want to customize it, run it with your community. There are also some folks who have already tested and given kind of examples of what they've done, so that can be helpful as well. I always like to appreciate all the folks who have contributed so far. There's been a ton of people that helped with the development of the activities, but several programs have been involved with beta and piloting these activities. So just trying to make sure to give credit for all their feedback. It's really been invaluable, particularly for Megan and myself. We create a lot of these things out of our heads, and when other people use them, sometimes you find that things aren't clear, or they could be longer, shorter, better in lots of ways. So I think Adam and Paul are going to take the next steps, but I just wanted to point out some potential next steps are: 1, just assessing where you currently are with governance or any of the facets. Then you'll want to decide which facet you want to focus on. Maybe it's technology, maybe it's governance, and then select particular activities that lead to your objectives. I want to point out, we do have a new beta website that it's not, we're showing people, but they're still in beta, so still playing with it. So feedback is particularly helpful on the activities and on the website. So I want to remind folks that we're eager for feedback. There is a listserv and lots of info on the website. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see folks. I'm happy to answer any questions, but also happy to hand it over to Paul and Adam for kind of the next steps of assessment.
Yeah, there's time for just 1 or 2 questions. If anyone has any big questions about the guidebook. Laurie, thank you so much for sharing that. Andrew, go ahead.
That was great. I wondered if you can think of any distinctions that we should bear in mind as we go through the next set of exercises about the focus on archives and things that are related to archives versus there are elements of the Odyssey community that have that feature. There are like libraries of vocabularies, there's libraries of phenotypes we're trying to build. There's other things that have that connection. There's a lot of other things that don't. There's kind of whole separate sections of the community that are doing different kinds of work based on some common resources that aren't really topically so related to maybe the particular group of entities that bound your work together. And I wonder if you can think of things we ought to keep in mind as we're going through this next set of things that Paul and Adam ought to lead us to, because it seems in some ways that there's a connection, but maybe some important differences, and I'm not sure what they are.
That's a great question. And one of the reasons we're always happy to get feedback, because if there are differences and distinctions, we'd love to hear about them. Just based on my last conversation with Paul and Adam, it does sound like you're um, well situated in a lot of ways, in terms of maybe already having a lot of contributors financially or code-wise. And that's not always the case with the chronically underfunded library and archives community. So you might be slightly better positioned, but I would love to, as you use the tools, if you find that there's um, approaches or things that don't ring true, or that you said, I really wish they made an activity that, surfaced this. We would love to hear that, because that we have lots of times created activities based on exactly that feedback.
Excellent. That was a great question. So I found the guide to be fairly generalizable. I think, the keys are, so the ground rules that I want to suggest is that we want to do a self-assessment where we are, but if we decide that we're at a level 1, that doesn't mean we need to go to a level 2. We should look at level 2, and we should see if there are things in there that are desirable for us that, we want that, and then we could say, what are the things we would want to do that? So I think part of the self-assessment is to see where we are. It's not necessary to say that we need to jump, we have to be at phase 3 for all things. I don't actually think we do. I think we want to do is it helps. I see this guide as it helps me think of ideas and ask questions. It kind of helps me drive a conversation around it. So that's what Adam and I are going to do. We might try to be a little provocative, but what we need here is a conversation of what we think is going on. And so I'm going to start this conversation, and I'm going to start it over. So here is the guide, and if you look at it, this is the PDF. And what you can do is as we kind of decide where we look at, we can jump to the different pages to see if we agree with that is where we think we are, and then we can kind of see, we can look at the next step to see if that's something that's desirable for us. And we're not here to take action today. We're here to kind of sense what sort of things might be opportunities before us that we might not have thought of beforehand. And I'm going to start in an area that I think that we're really strong, and that is community engagement. I think I'm really thrilled that Laurier thinks at the heart of open source community, and I agree with her, is the community, because I think that is our absolute strength. We have a blazing mission to improve healthcare. We have an incredibly engaged international community of people that are from different industries, where we have different disciplines combining, and we have different ways of engaging our members, and I just feel like our engagement is very strong. And so I want to, when we look at this, it says here, for community engagement, have we gotten beyond the initial stakeholders who helped develop the software? Have we broadened the community? And so what I'm going to show you is some of our Bitergia page, and this is just an overview of our GitHub repos over the last 10 years. And I would suggest, by looking at this, I love this page, by the way, because we've done 42,000 commits, 546 authors, 9,000 pull requests. It's kind of fun. But I look at the graph on the bottom left, and I have to say, maybe the first few years were all the initial stakeholders, but you really can't say that the people that were joining in 2020, 2022, it's still going up. And so I would say we are certainly beyond our initial stakeholders in that process. And so from looking from this GitHub authors log of our repos, without doing a detailed analysis, I feel that we are not at level 1 in community engagement. Adam, is there anyone else here want to challenge me on that? I would love the challenge, but I like to have, I've got my data from Bitergia to back me up. Okay, so let's look at maybe Andrew. You want to challenge me on that?
Not specifically challenge, but I guess there's a question in my mind about whether the breadth of community stakeholders, this is part of what my previous question was about. We want to serve many different communities. And I think the people who are interested in generating evidence for publication in a research setting are very well engaged. And I'm less sure about the breadth of the community stakeholders that we want to engage and how thoroughly we've engaged all of them. So we talk periodically about people in disease-focused professional societies, people who are concerned primarily with learning healthcare systems, people in the health technology assessment space, other broad classes of groups that we have probably varying degrees of engagement about. So I'm not questioning anything you said. I agree. I just wonder if one size fits all when we think about it, I guess.
Certainly not. And I think one thing I want to do with this conversation, I want to constrain it to just one of our communities, and that is the software development community. So this is just the people who write code. This is, but it is, even in there, we've got different populations. We've got our Java crowd, we've got an R crowd, we've got a Python crowd, and we've got the Hades community, which I think is just doing tremendous work. We've got the web front end with Atlas and Web API, which is really a powerful data science platform. But I do think that we're past the initial stage of the original developers being, the only people in the room. That we have new developers. We have the Chiron onboarding training program. We have seen growth in this community. So I think that I think what's exciting is that we have everything on GitHub. We have tried to be inclusive and open to new software developers in our community, and we are seeing new developers contribute new things. And so I think it's more interesting when we look at phase 2 and phase 3. And by the way, we probably shouldn't spend more than 10 minutes on any one topic, otherwise we won't get through them all. But I wanted to look at phase 2 and say, what does it mean to establish a CE infrastructure? And that was an interesting word for me. What does it mean to have a community engagement infrastructure? And so phase 2 is when we determine how to best facilitate engagement that works for our software development community. And I also feel pretty good about this. We have a Microsoft Teams tenant where we have monthly calls for our open source group here. We have monthly calls for our Hades group. We have monthly calls for our Atlas group. We have, of course, the we use GitHub issues and pull requests. And we have the Chiron onboarding training program, and we have our Odyssey Developers Conference. And so I kind of feel like we have a lot of the framework and structures to help new developers get involved. I think there's more that we want to do, but I also feel like we're building the infrastructure for engagement. And so I wanted to see, how people felt about level 2. Do we think we can claim we do reasonably well for phase 2 as well? And I'm gonna invite, so Maxim, I was hoping to get your input on that. What do you think about how well do we do for introducing new developers into our community? And sorry for putting you on the spot, but I intend to put a lot of people on the spot.
As a new developer to the community, if while the other person's getting off of mute, I find that you do a great job. I find that so time is always a problem, and being able to get people to commit their time is always going to be an issue, and it's an issue for me as well. I'd love to spend more time on this. Fortunately, I am in a place where I can spend some time on it. But the connect-a-thons and the activities where you bring people in, the document-a-thons, those sort of things are hugely helpful, especially document-a-thons, because someone can come in, it exposes them to the code, it exposes them to people that know the code, it introduces them. That's amazing. The online meetings, a Tuesday meeting is amazing.
Yeah.
The work groups, being able to sign up for a work group and attend a work group, I think that your communication is the best I've seen. It's outstanding from my perspective, and I feel really welcomed into the community as a new person.
That's great. And Lori, so we have an 11 a.m. call on Tuesdays for the entire community, for all of our 4 different disciplines: analytics, software development, statistical methods, and our clinical research. And I think we do a really nice job of trying to lay the framework of what's going on in our community. So I agree. I think community engagement, we're strong. And so I would like to, so let's go look at number 3, see if we think what we're doing at the level 3 level. And like I said, I think this is one of the, sorry about this, I have to scroll all the way back to the top. I know you're building a more interactive tool for this, but I still like this PDF document. Okay, so phase 3 is we evaluate. So that is something we don't do yet. That's something I actually would love to do. I'm a program director who teaches people, so I love evaluation of how we do for bringing onboarding new developers. And so that's something that I'd be super excited about doing. I think we do have a good infrastructure for enabling participation, but I would love to see how we could evaluate it. I would love to see how we could better assign mentors or find pairings for mentorship. And also, I also like the idea of representation from different technologies and different geographical regions, which is certainly a big topic and skill sets for the Odyssey community. So I think this, I think there's a couple things in here that gives me some ideas, but I do feel like we're probably at level 3 on community engagement with some ideas of ways that we can continue to improve it. Okay, is everyone, anyone disagree that we're not crushing it on community engagement? I do. I feel like that's. I think it's doing great. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Adam, and you're going to take a look at the technology stack. And I think, I do think engagement is really one of our absolute strengths in doing this. And so, Adam, you might want to share the screen just so we can get back to that chart. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so I just want to thank Laurier for joining us and also creating these materials. I mean, I was looking over them. I think the guidebook is a great start, and then the actual workshop materials that you put together are really great. I kind of wanted to engage everyone in the first activity, which is gathering some core data. And I'm kind of leading these 2 discussions on technology and governance. So I'm going to put a link to a form in the chat and just invite everyone to take a few minutes to fill out these questions that come straight from the first kind of activity in the workshop that Laurier puts together. And I think we can use the answers as to generate some really good discussion. So is everyone able to open that link and fill out those questions?
Yeah, the only challenge is we haven't really defined what formal governance is, which is in itself a difficult question.
Well, yeah, I think one of the things when I was thinking about this is what software kind of is under governance. So I think there's kind of different concentric circles of software. Maybe we have some that is that needs more governance and some that needs less. But formal, I guess. Well, actually, maybe I can punt this question to Laurier. How would you describe formal governance, Laurier?
Sorry, I was looking for the link that you sent. So your question is what? I'm sorry. How do I define formal governance?
Yeah. So what do we mean by, in particular, formal governance versus informal?
So I would preface this with saying there's nothing wrong with informal governance. There are some very successful programs that, decisions are made by people who show up, and that works for them, so that's fine. Formal governance tends to be more that it's documented, that there are roles and responsibilities, there might be position descriptions, people might be elected, they might be, they serve certain terms. There's lots of different models, but there might be a board, there might be councils where people are elected or appointed to certain roles. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think we're more on the who shows up. I do think, but every repo has maintainers who approve code. There's issues, there's pull requests. So there's definitely a process for how code gets into the repo, and there's maintainers on each of the repos that would approve that process. We don't have
rules.
Well, we don't have written down rules, and we don't have consistent rules between the different repos. But certainly there is a process within each of our repos.
And sometimes just documenting that process can be helpful, particularly for new folks.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that what I enjoyed reading your materials, Lori, and thinking about what we're doing, what I reflected on was that when we talk about our community is multifactorial, and I agree with Paul, we should focus this conversation just on open source development. But even in open source development, we actually have a kind of an ecosystem with a myriad of programs. And so as I was thinking about some of these questions, it made me reflect on the, I'll probably sound defensive, but I don't mean it to be, but my original intent when we were trying to set this up was to deliberately have an open sandbox where everybody can play and do everything. So that was like very consciously, no governance, no, like basically just like let people collaborate. And that was really with the goal of community engagement. And it was less about the technology. But then as we've moved forward, we've had certain technologies that are really getting adopted and used, in which case we've tried to shape some level of governance associated with how those technologies work. There I'd say we are I'll say like purposefully uneven, which is not to say that it's right, but to say like in that we've got situations where we're trying to invite people and say, listen, you've got no rules, no strings attached, just do what you want to do and hack code. And then we also have programs where we're trying to have, a maturity model, I guess I'd say, where we're trying to say these things need to follow certain principles because we really want them to be the things that can be promoted as best practice, that we can all agree to the rules of operation. And so as I was thinking about these categories, it just made me reflect on the fact that I guess I'm answering Adam's survey here, like thinking about the best case situation, recognizing fully that like a majority of the code development's like isn't actually even necessarily at that stage of maturation, nor is it intended to be.
Yeah, I would like to share one thing. I love this page. This page is an awesome page. The Hades developer status, showing the different repos, showing I'm so impressed with how many different maintainers there are for each of the repos, a tracking of how many open issues they are and pull requests, and the build status and the code coverage for testing. I do feel like this in itself is a great, maybe it's passive governance where it really provides transparency of maybe, we don't have, but expectations that we set that it has to have a certain level of testing, but it really demonstrates and promotes good software development practices. So maybe it's on the passive side. But I love this page. And I also want to point out, just in case you see that question, there's our development roadmap for Hades. And so I like this. This is actually really interesting that we do have a development roadmap. And so I thought that is great to see what we're hoping to do with the platform as well. And it might be more tactical, but I still think that it's great to be communicating that to our community.
And for this conversation, Paul, just in terms of how you'd like to orient us as we're thinking through this together, like specifically there, like, so there you were kind of referring to the Hades packages, which I would say is like on the one extreme of the maturity model of where we are at. If we think about Atlas and Web API, we're kind of at a different level of maturity. And then of course there's a whole bunch of things that are going on that are I would argue are quite valuable within the community, but they're just not at that stage. So as we're talking about this, do we want to be thinking about that aspirational end state like Hades, or do we want to be thinking about the full armamentarium of the stuff that was going on?
I think about the full armamentarium. And so Adam, maybe it'll be easier. So why don't you just walk down the technology phase and see where you think that we are, and have a discussion around that. And then we can do governance. I think governance is harder. It's always harder for me to wrap my head around. But I do feel like technology is certainly something we do very well within the community. So maybe it's easier to start with this stack.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I wanted to get with the survey, and I can already see the responses coming in, that like different people might have different perspectives on where we're at. So yeah, I guess the technology stack, phase one, you're kind of thinking about the maturity of the software itself. So is it in pre-release or, and once you're kind of in production, you're kind of at a more mature state, which Atlas is definitely in production in a lot of environments, Hades too. So, I think it's clear, like we do have software that's in production and being used across a number of organizations. The questions on that are part of the exercise are kind of around organizations, how many organizations are contributing, how many people are contributing. So like if we look at something like Hades, like or different parts of the software, like we get kind of a different answer to those questions. So like Paul, on your Bitergio dashboard, you're looking across the entire Odyssey repo. But if we look at, say, Atlas alone, how do the answers to those questions change? That might be.
I have another screen that I can pull up to show just the project. But let's see if I can add it here. I'll see if I can get the.
But like what I'm seeing here is that like most people, so 30% of people have said they don't know if we have a technology roadmap. Over half said yes. Some people say no. And approximately how many organizations are contributing to the code? It's kind of all over the map. So it's it's not really clear. And maybe this is because we don't know what specifically we're talking about in terms of the code. Are we talking about the production level code, or are we talking about the Odyssey sandbox?
But we do know there's hundreds to thousands of people using our software. So we certainly, what I thought was interesting on the technology side was we're certainly not at phase 1. We're arguably, phase 2 even, we've got a large group. What is interesting though is we do not have a standard release for the whole suite of software. We have, each package has their own release schedule. And so that was definitely something that I took away from this report and actually I took this away from the bioconductor discussion, is the value of having an overarching schedule release for the whole platform. And I think one of the, when you think of some of the problems that we're seeing, and I would say one of the problems that I saw that we talked about at the all hands meeting was the difficulty in running network studies, in having dependencies and having different packages being able to be supportable. And I do think that if we had a standard package for all of our software, I think we could then tie our network studies to that standard package. And I think what's interesting is even the scale assumes that we have a standard package or had a standard released for within our community. So I think that would be beneficial. Yeah, I had a hard time with a major release of what, right? We've got 230 repos and trying to think about, they're all actually very active. The main core packages within Hades and Atlas and Web API, they are certainly getting at least 1 or 2 major releases a year. So they're definitely not stagnating.
Yeah, and we've had some conversation about a major release of the entire tool stack. So Hades along with Atlas, and coordinating sort of a complete release of kind of all the core Odyssey tools, if we have a definition of that.
Okay. Andrew, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I want to see if there's a place for this issue or set of issues in what we're reviewing. I think the current state, where however we stack up on the maturity, the current state of the community is that lots of people are meeting needs that they have locally by developing things that they're not sure how to integrate into the main core of the rest of the infrastructure the community uses. So it may lead to forking of Atlas. It may lead to development of packages that aren't like just fully utilizing the rest of Hades, or they don't know how to make it an official Hades package. But I think there's just a lot that happens in that space at this point, and that one sign of greater maturity would be that there's a really clear path for somebody who's, they develop some analytic package. It doesn't already exist in Hades, and they know how, and they're on the road to making it a Hades package. At this point, I don't think that's generally the case. I think similarly with functionality people want to see in Atlas, there's a similar lack of understanding or clear pathway for people that would prevent them from forking or prevent them from doing other things. So I guess that's
It's a
my
great
statement
point.
of a problem, and I'm not sure if I've seen something that really kind of gets at that, which seems like a key component of maturity.
And so you're right. So actually, if I could share my screen for just a second, Adam, I'll show, this is the phase 3 for technology. And that I think the stack is stable. And the question is, does it serve future needs of the community? And, and when you said expansion, ability to integrate and re-architecture. So I kind of think that, maybe we're in phase 3, and now what our major things we should be thinking about are, how do we make it more pluggable? How do we make it more, interoperable, and consider how do we re-architect to be able to support those goals? Because that's kind of what led me to thinking that we have built a great platform. It's very successfully used. It is stable in production. But now the challenges we're seeing is we want to do expansion and be able to serve future needs.
That makes sense.
Sorry, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I think we can wrap up the technology section since we're on time. But thanks for answering the questions. And I think for me, the takeaway is like, even within this small group, there's different answers to those questions. Like some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. So, and some of the questions there's more consensus on, but others it's kind of split evenly. So
one of the things I quite like about Laurier's framework that I think we should be able to take on board is, if we are explicit about these things, we can actually just communicate. Like we can communicate. We think we're in phase 2 because here are the things we are doing and here's where they are. And we think we're not in phase 3 because we are missing these things. And I think it actually provides a good way for us to communicate so that, Adam, to your point about the diversity of perspective, I think some of it is we probably just don't all agree. I think a large part of it just like shared awareness because we all just see different pieces.
Yeah.
And so if I quite like this guidebook and framework as a way for us to try to communicate our honest assessment with each other, and things like, I think I would disagree. I think we would probably all disagree on like, do we have roadmaps? Like I put in the comment, like, we don't have an overarching roadmap. There are little bits and pieces of roadmaps and they are inconsistently maintained. Like that's my personal assessment of like where we're at, which is not a criticism. It's just like, that's where I think we're at. But, Paul, you were like, well, I like, because the fact we have this roadmap. And so I think for us to be able to say like, the topic is roadmaps, and we should just have a statement like, what's our strategy for roadmaps, one way or the other, can be a thing that we could really learn from each other and benefit. Like if we feel roadmaps are important as a principle, then let's like put some energy towards like, let's communicate roadmaps very clearly and figure that out. Just as an example.
Yeah, I would agree that I would love to see. I was just impressed that actually the roadmap was on the website. It's one thing to have roadmap. It's another thing to actually share the roadmap publicly on the GitHub page, and that deserves a little recognition. Okay, so let's talk about governance, because I think governance is harder to set where we are in the phases. I do think we could argue we're at phase 3 for technology, and our major challenges are making it serve future needs of the community with expansion, integration, and re-architecture. But I think with governance, I think it's going to be harder to figure out where we are.
yeah, so Paul, do you want me to lead some discussion around the governance topic? Or
yeah, so here I'll pull up this page. So we're working with, the phase 1 is working with the original engineers, project staff, or organization, and I think we're beyond a single organization. Let's see. I just want to see what phase 1 is of governance. So I think the intention is that the governance was developed, usually most software is developed by one group or one developer, and it's still in that person's head. And it's still really it's still their baby, and they're in that process. Would you agree with that? Now, Laurier, it'd be fun to see, is that how you're thinking of phase 1 in your governance?
In a lot of ways, yes. Like lots of times there's a certain funder or a certain organization that's leading it. And if they're still effectively in charge, that's not a horrible thing. They're probably invested, but that's an earlier phase.
Yeah.
A next phase is giving power to others effectively.
So so if I look at, looking at this, I always think of this in terms of sustainability, but we certainly see the majority, there's a lot of effort is coming from a single vendor. A lot of the time of the employees are investing into Odyssey, and this is and of course I want to point out that there's a lot we don't know still. There's a lot of people in here that we don't know their organization affiliation from. This is just trying to interpret their email addresses and in terms of their Git. And I do think I would like to also see how this changes over time. Because initially a lot of the software development really did come out of J&J, and I know that they're still completely vested, but there's certainly been a lot of openness and trying to increase that diversity in the process.
And I'm not sure how to reflect this appropriately, or whether the statistics, reflect this appropriately, but it feels to me that it shouldn't just be about code contributions as we think about this. It should be about users that are feeling empowered to feel like they're part of the process, which could also just include like posting issues and that kind of thing. Which I'm a useless programmer in our community at this point, but one of my contributions is finding problems because I'm a heavy user and then posting those. And I think having more users feel empowered to contribute through just sharing their experience is something I'd like to be able to provide appropriate recognition for. And I'm not sure if I genuinely just don't know whether that's actually like on this dashboard for the Bitergia dashboard, if that's actually reflected.
It's not. I wouldn't mind. So if I counter that, one of the things I would say is I think a lot of organizations getting a lot of value out of Odyssey. And I do think that I'm trying to get Hopkins to move up the list. I feel like I do. We are getting enormous value out of it, and and we actually should be contributing back the code that we make changes on, and we need, and we're hoping to, even provide some maintainer support. I do feel this presents an opportunity, saying there is a lot of the community that's getting value out of this that are not contributing to it, and that it does create a little bit of I feel it does present a little bit of an imbalance. And so
certainly that imbalance is both historical and still persists. I mean, Odysseus is doing a lot too. I think they're the second big one there.
Yeah.
But I think, we definitely have a smaller proportion of organizations that are contributing a large, hefty fraction, and we'd like to diversify that some more. I'm just thinking that, like, personally, I find high value when someone uses the tool, says there's a problem. Maybe they don't even have the technical capability to make a pull request, but the fact that they feel empowered enough to say, I found this issue, here's where it is, here's the problem, can somebody help me? I think that actually is a contribution in its own right.
I absolutely agree. And I'm a big fan of Steve Wally's, was it 100 to 1? For 100 users, there may be 10 who submit their problems, and then there might be one who submits a solution to their problem along with the problem that they encountered. And so I think that we definitely want to empower the communities at scale, but I think we also want to look for ways that we can encourage other organizations to participate in the software development. Okay, let's go back. So, okay, Adam, sorry. This is your baby. I just wanted to pop in, and so this is level 1, and so what would level 2 look like for governance?
Yeah, so I think this is like well, to me, I think it is about defining what software is under governance and what the governance structures might look like, and making some of those formal. I wanted to, I kind of want to show the answer to some of these questions that we had. So like this one, has the governance experienced one or more issues that couldn't be resolved in the last 18 months? Some people say yes. So there's clearly like something that the people are thinking about. A lot of people say they don't know. Are there governance meetings? Who would be involved in those governance meetings? How does the decision-making process happen? Do we have terms of service or appointments or election process? So that's pretty clearly no.
No.
Have we made any modifications to the government structures since the program started? So definitely yes. Like I think there's certainly evolution in governance, and I think in Hades there definitely have been decision-making processes. And earlier this year, I think we actually went through a voting process that Martine initiated. So we had like a key decision that had to be made and eventually had to go to a vote. I think also like how in Hades in particular, speaking from my perspective, I think how developers communicate is really important. So what channels people use to communicate? Are they using internal company channels, or are they using the like channels where like the Hades workgroup channel, or or GitHub? What are the channels that people are using to communicate development ideas or where things are at? Have we had any evaluation of the governance structures in the past 3 years? So most people are saying they don't know or no. Looks like one person says yes, there has been. Do we have documented policies for these different things? So code contribution, a lot of people say yes, and some people say no. So maybe this is an awareness thing where it's out there, but not everyone's aware of it. Road mapping, some people say yes, people say no, several people don't know. Strategic planning, again, like it's kind of split. So I think on these things, if there is documentation out there, like just maybe having some central location where people can say, where there's just more awareness and it's like easy to find. So one thing in Odyssey is like there's so much stuff out there, it's kind of hard to find some of these things. So I think just polling the group and seeing where things are at, like how people kind of are thinking about governance, to me it highlights maybe just findability of documentation, findability of like the processes and what's out there. Any reactions to these results from anybody?
So Lori, I'm just interested, is it, this would have been much easier to do if we were looking at one repo. I feel like this would have been, we could have really easily answered these questions quickly if we had one repo. Well, we have 231 repos, and some are pure experimental sandboxes, and some are critical software at the core of our society, at a part of our community. So, in your experience within the communities that you work with, is it typically just one package? And this is what we saw with Bioconductor too. It was really, they had one software that they managed, and then they basically helped build a library for other packages.
I think you've hit on some good things in terms of you just have to define what you're focused on. Are you focused on hundreds of communities, one community? And I thought you did nicely at the beginning of this to say like we're really focused on the developer communities. But it might be one of the next steps. There is a nice activity about who is your community. There's an instinct, and I've done this too, to serve everybody. And you want to serve everybody, but you might be prioritizing a few different audiences. Maybe there's a particular repository or a group of repositories that you really think needs some more work, and that might be your first priority.
I would agree. I think our repos are all at different maturities as well. I think that's part of the challenge to how we define the maturity model.
And don't feel bad that there's so many don't knows. I've done different activities with different groups, and there's a community that was doing a governance thing, and half the governance board didn't know the answers to a lot of things. That's really an opportunity to revisit that. And sometimes people in certain areas know lots of information and other people don't. So it's an opportunity to reshare and re-educate and over-communicate those things.
Laurie, as it relates to governance, I've read a bunch that it seems like there's kind of two approaches to governance. One is you try to be anticipatory of where you're going to go as a community, and the other is kind of reactive in that, you know, something comes up that then necessitates more formal process. In the communities that you're leading, can you just share like what that maturation process has been for us to learn from?
That's a great question. I do think a lot of the boards that I work on are really trying to get ahead of the community. You know, they're not wanting to be reactive, but there's a particular community I'm thinking of that they put out a release and it just didn't speak to the community. And so they wound up doing a lot of like, oh, we thought this was the new exciting whatever it was, and we thought you'd be excited, but it's a mismatch. So we really need to dig deep and figure out what the community needs, and got some grant funding to reset, and that's how you learn. But I think in lots of ways that boards want to be thinking, you know, years ahead. And that's what I think would be interesting to think about if you're focused on the technology. A lot of the processes you have sound like they're kind of more local about who approves what, but who decides like what we're doing 10 years out or 5 years out or 2 years out? Like, do you have yearly, you know, get together to envision, or is it community members come forward, or what is the process if somebody's thinking like, you know, we're kind of going in a direction that I want us to be deliberate about, or making sure we're all on the same page. So I'd be fascinated to think how your
So
community wants to do that.
I struggle. So, Laura, so for a voluntary community, how do you set a roadmap with timelines when it's volunteers who are going to be doing that work? Because I mean, if I have FTEs that work for me, I can set a timeline and deliverables. But for doing it for a community, do you just say, how do you try to manage that?
It's a challenge. And so one of the programs I work with, Archive Space, has found that just getting contributions, technical contributions, just is not being very effective. So they've shifted to hiring staff. For DSpace, we had a lot of technical contributions, but they were not at the pace that we needed. So we did a lot of fundraising around paying for development. For another program, Fedora, some of the folks are very dedicated and have resources at their institutions that they're willing to allocate. And so I think the perfect part about governance and community engagement is just that. Saying we want to do something is different than agreeing as a community that we want to do something, and agreeing as a community that we want to do something means you have to contribute to making that go forward. And it's very challenging to say like, we're going to do X in 12 months and see who shows up. But if they want it, they're more likely to be able to participate and drive towards it versus being handed a, this is our roadmap, what do you want to do?
Yeah, so you're saying that it's really the art in building the roadmaps is how you vest the organizations.
It's an opportunity for engagement.
There you go. That is a good point to stroke on. So as always, we've left finances to the end, and we're running out of time.
I'll assert we are strongly in phase one of that, so we don't need to have much of a discussion.
I think what was interesting with I think that it was interesting with resource. Yeah, we've been averse as a community. I think it's one of our real strengths is that we've been averse to monetize things and we don't have a membership dues. We don't have any paywalls, and it's been such an inclusive community. It's been great since we don't have a business model. We haven't been limited by a business model. So I actually think it's been one of our strengths. But I do think, yeah, we don't have distributed resourcing or meeting. We can pay for our meetings, and so we do that, and we have a coordinating center that we pay for our team's tenant, and so we do have a small number of revenue streams that go in and pay for that from our annual meeting. So I kind of think, we're actually probably somewhere between phase one and phase two around, we're not, and the questions are, what I think we're at a certain maturity where we think that it might be worthwhile to have some paid maintainer for certain pieces of the software that could help catalyze the volunteers. And I don't know if you have any suggestions of other ways we can look at how people balance, paid maintainers with volunteers in a community.
Is that for me? I wasn't
Yes.
sure. There are some activities that kind of get at that. It's a challenge once you start saying we're going to pay people or hire people. There is an argument that then why would other people contribute voluntarily if somebody else is going to do it? So you want to be thoughtful about it. And even with DSpace, where we've started to do a paid development model, it was for a specific purpose. We need to accelerate development in this area. It's not an open-ended commitment. And so the idea was to do this for a short time, to accelerate development, and then bring up the skill set of people familiar with the newest version so that they could contribute. So it's a multi-pronged approach of like, is the lack of contribution because they don't have the particular knowledge of that software? Is it time? Trying to really identify why people aren't participating. But I think you've identified it. It is a risk to change the model without understanding how it will impact the existing contributions.
Yeah. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for your time. We're out of time. This is a great conversation, and this is just the beginning of our conversation around these areas. I would love to bring you back as we start wrestling with some more of the pieces. I think it really does give us a lot of ideas and start thinking about what things we would benefit by moving to a different phase in one of the different areas. But I really enjoyed this guide. I felt this helped me think things and see opportunities that I think are advantageous for our community as we are in a period of rapid growth. And so we're seeing a lot of users take this up. We want to see a whole new niche of users use our software, and trying to think about how we could kind of deliver it in a simpler way to them is something that is exciting us all. So thank you so much for your time, and we'd love to stay in touch and get you and maybe get some feedback as we start developing those roadmaps.
Yes, I would love it. If you have questions, feel free to ask. But also, I think it's important to kind of identify where you are, but don't get too hung up on, half the people think you're a 1 and half the people think you're a 2, and it's not the end of the world. The whole idea is to give some kind of consensus and a framework for picking activities, but you can pick activities in whatever area. They don't have to be limited.
Yeah, and as you finish your toolkit as part of your grant, please enjoy, have us be your guinea pigs to start playing with the toolkit.
Great, happy to. Yes.
Sure. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Sorry we went over, and we'll continue the conversation in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. This was wonderful. Appreciate it.
Thank you.